For years, there's been this one question that's just echoed everywhere, fueling all sorts of speculation. The death of Jeffrey Epstein in federal custody, it's a story that sounds almost unbelievable. But the official story isn't about some wild conspiracy. It's about a catastrophic, systemic failure. And for this explainer, we're going to go straight to the source. We're diving into the massive 127-page report from the Department of Justice's own Office of the Inspector General. This is the official anatomy of how the whole system just completely broke down.
All right, so the investigation really kicks off with the one central fact that nobody disputes.
He was being held on federal sex trafficking charges. And not just in any cell. He was in the special housing unit, or the SHU, which is supposed to be one of the most secure parts of the entire facility. So, what on earth went wrong? Well, to figure that out, investigators had to zoom right in. They focused on those critical moments leading up to his death, putting together a timeline of his final 48 hours. And when you look at this timeline, you can just feel the pressure building. First, he signs a new will. Then, boom, the next morning his cellmate is transferred out, leaving him completely isolated. That same evening, a court unseals thousands of pages of incredibly damaging documents about him, and the media just explodes. This whole sequence is a big deal, but that cellmate situation, that was the first, most obvious red flag. And get this, leaving him without a cellmate wasn't just some small mistake. After an earlier incident, the prison's own psychology staff had given a direct order: Epstein must be housed with a cellmate, period. So this was the first, and you could argue, the most critical violation of protocol. But as big a deal as that was, it turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators kept digging, they uncovered this whole ecosystem of negligence and misconduct.
So let's talk about policy for a second. There's this really basic core rule from the Bureau of Prisons, or BOP. In a high-risk unit, guards are mandated to physically check on every single inmate every 30 minutes, twice an hour. That's the rule. It's crystal clear. And you gotta see this. This picture says it all. The staff knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing. They had this handwritten sign, with mandatory misspelled, by the way, posted right in their workspace. It's a stark, almost absurd reminder that these checks were a direct order.
So you've got the policy, you've got the sign, and yet, for nearly 8 hours, think about that, a full night's sleep, no one laid eyes on Jeffrey Epstein. From roughly 10:40 p.m. until 6:30 the next morning, he was completely unchecked. So the big question is, what were the guards doing all that time?
Well, it turns out they were covering their tracks. The official logs for that night, they looked perfect. They showed all the inmate counts, all the rounds, everything signed off like it was supposed to be. But in reality, the OIG found evidence that the officers were literally asleep or shopping online for furniture and motorcycles on prison computers. They created a perfect paper trail to hide a complete dereliction of duty.
Now look, this in no way excuses what they did, but it does give some really critical context. The prison was chronically massively understaffed. One of the officers guarding Epstein that night was on his third consecutive shift. He'd already been working for 24 straight hours when he was assigned that overtime. The report makes it clear that extreme fatigue was a huge contributing factor.
Okay, so right about now, you're probably thinking, but wait, what about the security cameras? Surely they would show exactly what happened, right? And yeah, the unit was covered by multiple cameras, all over the common areas, and the cell tiers.
But here's the real kicker. The one camera that could have shown who, if anyone, went near Epstein's cell was broken. It had stopped recording 12 days earlier because of a catastrophic disk failure. This created a giant evidentiary black hole right in the middle of the whole investigation.
So let's recap. You've got falsified logs, sleeping guards, and broken cameras. How in the world did investigators determine the cause of death? Well, they had to turn to the forensic evidence. And this is a key piece of that evidence. This ligature, made from a torn piece of orange prison cloth, was found right there in the cell. This was absolutely central to what the medical examiner concluded. And that conclusion was unambiguous. The autopsy found the cause of death was hanging, and the manner of death was suicide. And this is so important. The medical examiner found zero physical evidence to suggest a homicide. No signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds on Epstein's body, nothing.
In fact, the report directly quotes the medical examiner who explained that the specific injuries observed were classic indicators of a suicide by hanging, not a murder by strangulation. The forensic science, according to the DOJ's own investigators, points in one direction.
So, the official cause of death may have been determined, but the report makes it very clear that this is not where the story ends. The real tragedy here goes so far beyond one man's death. You see, what happened to Epstein wasn't some isolated incident. The OIG report basically calls it a symptom of a much larger disease infecting the entire federal prison system. These issues, the staffing shortages, the broken cameras, the faked records, are systemic problems the OIG has identified again and again all across the country.
In response, the OIG laid out a series of urgent recommendations to try and fix this broken system. Hire more staff, fix the cameras, actually enforce the rules, and create clear policies for high-risk inmates. And the Bureau of Prisons has agreed to all of them. But for so many people, any fixes will come too late. This quote from the report brings us to the ultimate, devastating human cost of this failure. Epstein's death meant his numerous victims were forever deprived of their day in court, their chance to see justice served. In the end, the official investigation didn't find a conspiracy. It found something more mundane, and maybe even more disturbing. A system so broken by negligence and dysfunction that it allowed the country's most high-profile inmate to die on its watch. And that leaves us with a final, lingering question. When a system fails this profoundly, what does that really say about the promise of justice?